My fiance said, I'm taking my sister to the concert instead of you. She deserves it more. I bought those tickets for her birthday, so I let her go have fun while I dismantled everything between us. When she came home and saw what I'd done, she lost her mind. Hey Reddit, my fiance decided to take her sister to the concert with the tickets I bought for her birthday. I didn't say anything, just waited until she left and did what needed to be done. She came home to an empty apartment and a note. Let me back up a bit so you understand how I ended up here. Name's Jensen, 28 male. I grew up in a working class neighborhood outside of Cleveland. Dad was a machinist who worked the same factory for 32 years. Mom was an ER nurse who pulled double shifts to make sure we never went without. They taught me two things that stuck: work hard and don't let anyone treat you like a doormat. Dad used to say that respect isn't given, it's established. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate. I thought I got that. Turns out, knowing something and actually living it are two different things. I work in logistics and supply chain coordination for a regional distribution company. I spent my days managing freight schedules, negotiating rates with carriers, tracking shipments across 3 time zones, and fixing problems that happened when trucks broke down in the middle of nowhere. It was stressful work, the kind that gives you gray hairs at 25, but it paid well. I pulled in about 75 grand a year, which in our city meant I could afford a solid 2-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood and still put money away for the future. I met Fiona at a friend's wedding 4 years before the incident. She was a bridesmaid. I knew the groom from college. She was stunning in that way where she didn't seem to be trying too hard. Dark hair, bright eyes, a laugh that made you want to be funnier. She had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the room when she focused on you. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. I did the whole thing right. Asked her father's permission, planned a trip to this overlook spot where we'd had our first real date, got down on one knee with my grandmother's ring. She said yes, cried. We celebrated. I thought I'd found my person. Fiona was 27. She worked part-time as a receptionist at a yoga studio downtown, maybe 20 hours a week. The rest of her time went into building her online presence as a lifestyle influencer. She had about 6,000 followers on Instagram when we got engaged, which she treated like she was on the verge of being discovered by some major brand any day now. I supported it. I paid for the ring light, the camera equipment, the backdrop for her photos, the subscription boxes she'd unbox on video. I figured she was chasing a dream, and that's what partners do. We moved in together 3 months after the engagement. The apartment was in my name because Fiona's credit was wrecked from some old student loans she'd defaulted on during her early 20s. She'd gone to a private college for communications, dropped out after 2 years, and the debt followed her around. No big deal, I figured. We were getting married anyway. I signed the lease solo, put the utilities in my name, handled the internet account. She was just an occupant on paper. Fiona said she was lucky to have me. At the time, I thought that was sweet. Looking back, I realized she was just relieved to find someone willing to carry the load. For the first 6 months, things were genuinely good. We found our rhythm. I worked long hours. She did her content creation thing. We spent weekends together exploring the city or binging shows on the couch. I paid most of the bills because I made more money and she was building her brand. I didn't mind. That's what you do when you're building a life with someone. Then Bridget showed up, Fiona's older sister. She was 30, divorced about a year prior, and had recently moved back to our city after burning through all her options elsewhere. She was one of those people who peaked in high school and spent the rest of her life trying to get back to that feeling. Former homecoming queen, head cheerleader, dated the quarterback, the whole thing. She married her college boyfriend at 22 in this huge wedding that her parents went into debt for. The marriage lasted 7 years before he finally got tired of being treated like a personal assistant who she occasionally slept with. I met the ex-husband once, briefly, at a family barbecue before the divorce was finalized. His name was Evan. He told me out of earshot of the family to watch how Bridget treated service workers. Said it would tell me everything I needed to know about the family dynamics. I didn't understand what he meant at the time. From what I gathered through various family conversations, Evan had asked for the divorce, not Bridget. He'd been planning his exit for over a year, quietly separating finances. When he finally pulled the trigger, Bridget was blindsided. She got the house in the settlement, sold it within 2 months, and blew through the money in about 6 more on. After that, she was between opportunities, which was her way of saying unemployed and too proud to admit it. She crashed with friends in her old city for a few months, burned those bridges, then rotated through various family members. By the time she moved back to our city and landed on our couch, she'd already worn out her welcome with 2 aunts and her parents. She hadn't held a real job in months and showed no signs of looking for one. The dynamic was toxic from day one. She had this way of making everything about her. If Fiona had a good day at work, Bridget had a story about how her day was harder. If I mentioned anything about my job, about the stress or the wins or anything at all, she would roll her eyes and make some comment about how corporate jobs were soul-crushing prisons for people without creativity. She didn't have a job herself, mind you. Hadn't had one since before the divorce finalized. But she had plenty of opinions about mine. She showed up 3 to 4 days a week, sometimes more. She'd let herself in with the spare key Fiona had given her without asking me. She'd eat food from our fridge, stuff I'd bought on my grocery runs. She'd leave dishes in the sink for days. She'd hog our TV watching whatever reality show she was into. She barely acknowledged my existence unless she needed something. 3 months into this arrangement, I'd had enough. I waited until one evening when Bridget had left, and I pulled Fiona aside. "Look," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I get that she's your sister, and she's going through a rough patch. But this has been going on for months. She's here all the time. She eats our food. She uses our utilities. Can we maybe set some limits? Like a schedule for visits? Or a timeline for when she's going to find her own place?" Fiona's face went cold immediately. "She's family, Jensen. She's going through the worst time of her life. Her marriage fell apart. She lost her house. I can't believe you're being this selfish." "I'm not being selfish. I'm asking for basic boundaries. She ate an entire rotisserie chicken yesterday. By herself. That was supposed to be dinner for 2 nights. You're being petty. It's just food. I'm being practical. We're supposed to be saving for a wedding. We talked about a venue deposit next month. I can't save money when I'm feeding 3 people on 1 income while she contributes nothing. So this is about money. Nice?" She crossed her arms. "Real nice. It's about respect." I kept my voice level, even though I wanted to yell. "She doesn't respect our space, our time, or our relationship. She makes comments about my job. She leaves her stuff everywhere. She never says thank you for anything." Fiona didn't respond for a long moment. Then she hit me with the line that should have sent me running. "If you really loved me, you'd understand that family comes first. Always. Bridget won't be here forever. She just needs time to get back on her feet. If you can't handle supporting my family during a hard time, then maybe I don't know you as well as I thought I did." I dropped it. That was my first major mistake. Not because I was wrong, but because I let her twist reasonable boundaries into some kind of character flaw. That's how it starts. They test you with small stuff, see what you'll put up with, then push a little further, and a little further. One time, about 5 months in, Bridget borrowed my car because hers was in the shop, said she needed it for a job interview. I found out later there was no interview. She'd driven 40 miles to meet some guy from a dating app, racked up a parking ticket downtown, and returned my car with the gas light on. When I mentioned the ticket, she laughed and said I could probably afford it. Nothing changed after my conversation with Fiona. If anything, Bridget's presence got worse. There was a guy at my job named Owen. He was about 40, worked in vendor relations, and he was one of those people who seemed to know everyone in a 3-state radius. 20 years in the logistics industry meant he had contacts everywhere. Trucking companies, warehouse managers, port authorities, venue operators. You name it. If there was a connection to be made, Owen had probably already made it over lunch at some industry conference. More importantly, Owen was a genuinely good guy. He'd taken me under his wing when I started at the company, back when I was a 24-year-old kid. We grabbed lunch together at least once a week, and those conversations were often the best part of my day. Owen had also been through his own divorce about 8 years back. His ex-wife had cheated on him with his business partner, and the fallout had nearly destroyed him. He'd remarried a woman who actually appreciated him, and came out the other side with a lot of hard-won wisdom about relationships. He never said anything directly about Fiona and Bridget, but I could tell from the way he'd raise his eyebrows during my stories that he saw where this was heading long before I did. About 6 weeks before Fiona's birthday, Owen and I were grabbing lunch at this taco place near the office. I mentioned I was trying to find tickets to see the Midnight Echo. They were this indie synth-pop band that had been underground for years before their 3rd album went viral. Fiona was obsessed with them. She'd been playing their music constantly, had their poster in our apartment, followed every member on social media. They were doing a single show in our city as part of their tour, and tickets had sold out in literally minutes. Scalpers were asking $700 or $800 per ticket, which was insane for a band most people had never heard of 2 years ago. Owen leaned back in his chair. "My brother-in-law works event security at that venue. Let me make a call." I told him not to go out of his way, but Owen was already texting. A week and a half later, Owen came through. 2 floor seats, not VIP but solid placement, for $450 total. Face value. In a market where scalpers were gouging people for 3 times that amount, this was huge. He wouldn't even let me pay him back for making the calls. You sure about this? He asked when he handed me the tickets. Big gesture for someone who's got her sister camped out on your couch. I told him it would be fine, that this was about me and Fiona, not Bridget. Owen just nodded, but I could tell he wasn't buying it. Said watching me try to navigate this relationship was payment enough. I kept the tickets secret for 3 weeks. The concert was scheduled for the Saturday after Fiona's birthday, which fell on a Wednesday. My plan was to give them to her on her actual birthday, so she'd have a few days to get excited. We'd make a whole night of it. Dinner at her favorite restaurant beforehand, the show, maybe dessert after at that rooftop spot she'd been wanting to try. Just the two of us. No Bridget, a real date night for the first time in months. Wednesday came. I left work early, stopped by her favorite bakery and picked up a small cake. I had the tickets printed out in an envelope with a card I'd written myself. Something simple about how much I loved her and how I couldn't wait to share this experience together. I got home around 5 p.m. Bridget was there. Of course she was. She was sprawled on my couch in what I'm pretty sure was Fiona's robe, scrolling through her phone with her feet on my coffee table. She didn't look up when I walked in. Fiona was in the bedroom doing her makeup for a birthday dinner we had planned with friends later that evening. Hey, I said, setting down the cake and sliding the envelope across the dresser. Happy birthday. Open this one first. She picked it up with curiosity. When she pulled out the tickets, her whole face lit up. Eyes wide, mouth open, genuine shock. No way. The Echo? Floor seats? These are sold out everywhere. How did you even get these? I know a guy, I said, enjoying her reaction. I thought we could make a real night of it. Dinner beforehand? The show? Maybe grab dessert after at that rooftop place you wanted to try. She jumped up and hugged me. For about 30 seconds, maybe 45, everything felt like it used to. Like we were actually a couple who loved each other, instead of two people going through the motions while her sister ate all our food. Then Bridget appeared in the doorway. What's going on? She asked, leaning against the doorframe with that annoyed look. Jensen got me tickets to the Midnight Echo, Fiona said, holding them up. Floor seats. For Saturday. Bridget's face went through a whole thing that I watched in real time. Surprise, then jealousy, then something that made my stomach tighten. She pushed off the doorframe and walked closer, actually taking one of the tickets from Fiona's hand to look at it. Oh my God, she breathed. You know I've been dying to see them, right? Remember, we used to listen to their first album in my car in high school? Before they were famous? This was our thing. I watched the shift happen. Fiona's eyes moved between me and her sister. I remember, she said slowly. I caught the look they exchanged, but I didn't say anything because I figured even Fiona wouldn't be that bold. I was dead wrong. The conversation happened 2 days later, on Friday night. I was in the kitchen making dinner. Pasta with a creamy tomato sauce from scratch, garlic bread, Caesar salad. Bridget had been over every single day since the birthday, which wasn't unusual, but the vibe was different. She and Fiona kept having these hushed conversations that stopped the second I walked into the room. Around 7 p.m., Fiona came into the kitchen. So I've been thinking about tomorrow, she started, leaning against the counter. I stirred the sauce. What about it? Bridget is really struggling right now. The divorce stuff, not having her own place, the job search that keeps going nowhere. She's been really down lately. Okay. And you know how much she loves the Echo. They were her favorite band before they were mine. She's the one who got me into their music back in high school. I put the spoon down and turned to face her. I could feel where this was going. Where is this going, Fiona? She did this dramatic sigh. I think I should take Bridget to the concert instead of you. I stared at her. She needs this more than you do, she continued. You don't even know all their songs. You're just going to stand there while Bridget and I actually connect with the music. She's been through so much, and this could really boost her mood. She needs a win. I leaned against the counter and crossed my arms. Let me make sure I'm hearing this right, I said. I spent $450 on tickets for your birthday. I called in a favor from a coworker who went out of his way to help. I planned a date night for us. And you want to bring your sister instead? You're making it sound worse than it is. How should it sound? She huffed, annoyed. It's my gift. I should get to decide what I do with it. And if you really loved me, you'd want me to have the best time possible. Bridget will appreciate it more than you will. She actually gets the music. I felt something shift in my chest, like everything finally snapping into focus after staring at a blurry picture for 2 years. What about what I want? I asked. What about the fact that I wanted to spend this night with you? That I planned this for us to actually have time together? Don't be selfish, Jensen. Bridget is family. She's blood. You and I can do something else some other time. There it was. I would always be below her sister. The guy who paid the bills and bought the gifts ranked lower than the woman who contributed nothing and took everything. Something just switched off inside me. Fine, I said. I turned back to the stove. Take Bridget. If that's what you want, go ahead. She blinked, surprised by how fast I gave in. Really? You're okay with it? Yeah. She rushed over and hugged me from behind. I stood there, stiff, staring at the sauce bubbling on the stove. Thank you so much. I knew you'd get it. You're the best. M. She was already pulling out her phone to text Bridget the good news. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of sadness, but because I was planning. See, here's what Fiona didn't know, or didn't bother to think about. The apartment was in my name. The lease, the utilities, the internet, everything. When we'd moved in together, her credit was too wrecked to be on anything official. She was just an occupant. I'd asked Owen's brother, who was a lawyer, about my situation early on. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't doing anything stupid. He told me I was on solid ground, though he reminded me every situation is different. The engagement ring was also still legally mine. She'd pushed for us to get it appraised and added to her insurance policy, but I dragged my feet on the paperwork. Kept saying I'd get to it next week. The ring was a family heirloom, my grandmother's diamond reset with a new band. My mother had given it to me with the understanding that if the engagement didn't work out, it came back to the family. It was worth about $8,000, and it was currently sitting in Fiona's jewelry box. Saturday morning, I called in sick to work. Fiona was at the yoga studio until noon, covering someone's shift. Bridget was wherever Bridget went when she wasn't on my couch. I made coffee, sat down at the kitchen table with a legal pad, and started making calls. First call was to Owen. I told him what happened. There was a long silence on the other end. She did what? Owen finally said. She's taking her sister. The sister who's been crashing on our couch rent-free for 8 months. He let out a slow breath. What do you need? I need to know if your wife's cousin still manages that apartment complex on the east side, the one with the month-to-month leases. 3 hours later, I had signed a lease for a one-bedroom unit starting that day. First month plus security deposit came out to about $1,900. I wrote the check without blinking. Second call was to my landlord. Our current lease had rolled month to month after the first year, which means I could get out with 30 days' notice. I called Dominic, explained I needed out now, and offered to pay a full month's rent as a penalty, plus forfeit my security deposit. You sure about this? Dominic asked. Sounds pretty final. I'm very sure. There was a pause. I'll have the place listed by Tuesday. Keys in the Dropbox by Sunday night. Third call was to a moving company that specialized in rush jobs. Saturday evening service while she was at the concert. 3 guys, 4 hours, $1,100. Then there was the ring. Fiona had this habit of taking it off when she showered. She kept it in her jewelry box on the dresser, right next to the perfume bottles and the earring tree. I waited until she was in the bathroom getting ready for the concert. I walked into the bedroom, opened the jewelry box, and took my grandmother's ring. I slipped it into my pocket and walked out. She never noticed. The afternoon dragged. Fiona was buzzing around the apartment trying on different outfits, video calling Bridget to coordinate their looks. She tried on 3 different dresses before settling on the black one I'd bought her for our anniversary dinner 6 months ago. I sat on the couch, pretending to watch TV, mentally running through everything in the apartment that belonged to me. Couch, TV, dining table and chairs, bed frame and mattress, the kitchen equipment, all mine. Fiona's contributions to the place were her clothes, her makeup, her yoga mats, and the pile of stuff Bridget had accumulated over 8 months of squatting. She arrived around 5 p.m. She walked in without knocking, like always, and barely glanced my way. Ready? She asked Fiona. Almost. Fiona came out of the bedroom. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. She paused, looking back at me on the couch. We'll probably get food after the show, so don't wait up. There's leftovers in the fridge. Have fun, I said. It was the last fun she was ever going to have at my expense. The moving crew arrived at 6:30 p.m., exactly when I told them to. 3 guys in a white box truck. The foreman was a big dude named Ray, who looked like someone who'd loaded 1,000 apartments and nothing fazed him anymore. Gray beard, forearms like tree trunks. I met them in the parking lot and shook hands. So what's the deal? Ray asked as we walked toward the building. Just so I know what we're working with. I told him about it. Then I walked them through the apartment, pointing out what went and what stayed. Everything except the stuff in that corner, I said, gesturing to Fiona's belongings. That stays. Everything else goes. Ray looked at the pile, then scanned the rest of the apartment. The couch alone is probably worth more than all that combined. I'm aware. They worked fast. Within 90 minutes, the living room was stripped. Couch, gone. TV, gone. Coffee table, entertainment center, bookshelves, all loaded into the truck. The dining room went next. Table, chairs, the nice light fixture I'd bought to replace the ugly one the apartment came with. By 9 p.m., the apartment looked like a crime scene. Empty walls, dust outlines where furniture used to be. The only things remaining were Fiona's belongings, and one folding chair I left in the middle of the living room. I did a final sweep, checked every drawer, every closet, every cabinet, made sure I hadn't left anything behind that mattered. Then I got to the bathroom. I took the nice towels, the ones I'd bought at a home goods store when we moved in. I took the shower curtain. I took the bath mat and the toilet paper, because I'd just bought a 24-pack the week before, and I wasn't leaving that behind. I sat down at the kitchen counter, the only surface left in the apartment, and wrote the note on the back of an old electric bill. Fiona, she can have the tickets, and you can have the life you actually wanted. The lease is terminated. Dominic will be here Monday at 9 a.m. for the walkthrough. You have until then to get your stuff out. Do not contact me. The engagement is over. The ring belongs to my family and is back where it belongs. Good luck, Jensen. I left the note next to her keys. Then I locked the door, walked downstairs, and dropped my keys in Dominic's Dropbox. I drove to my new apartment, unpacked the essentials, ordered Chinese food from a place that delivered late, sat on my couch in my new quiet living room, and ate Kung Pao chicken while blocking every number I could think of. Fiona, Bridget, their mother, their aunt who I'd met once at Thanksgiving, every mutual friend who might try to play peacemaker. Then I turned off my phone and went to sleep. Best sleep I'd had in 2 years. The fallout started Sunday morning. Owen called me around 10 a.m., sounding impressed. So it's done? He asked. It's done. Good for you, man. Seriously, that took guts. But you know she's gonna come after you, right? I know. I'm ready. What I wasn't ready for was how fast they got organized. Around 2 p.m., I got a knock on my door. I hadn't told anyone my new address except Owen, my parents, and my landlord. I looked through the peephole and saw Fiona's mother, Michelle. I didn't open the door. I know you're in there, Nathan. She knocked again, harder. We need to talk about what you did to my daughter. She's sitting in an empty apartment with no furniture and nowhere to go. This is not how grown-ups handle problems. I stayed quiet. The knocking continued for about 10 minutes. She gave me a whole lecture through the door about responsibility, about commitment, about how I owed Fiona an explanation at the very least. When I didn't respond, she slipped a note under the door. This isn't over. You owe Fiona an apology and the ring. Call me when you're ready to act like a man. I threw it in the trash. The next morning at work, I told Owen what happened with Michelle. He shook his head. They tracked you down that fast? Her husband works for the city. Probably ran my new address through some database. I don't know. Doesn't matter. She can knock all she wants. Owen leaned back in his chair. You know what this means, right? They're freaking out. They expected you to cave. You didn't. Now they've got nothing. He was dead on. Everything that happened after that had the energy of people making it up as they went. Monday was more interesting. I got to work around 7:30, figuring an early start would help me focus. Around 10 a.m., I got a call from building security. There's a woman at reception asking for you. Says she's your fiancé. Ex-fiancé, I corrected. Don't let her up. I'll come down. I took the elevator to the lobby. Fiona was standing near the security desk looking rough. Hair unwashed, sweats, red eyes. Bridget was with her, arms crossed, looking like she wanted to throw hands. Jensen, we need to talk. No, we don't. You can't just do this. Her voice cracked. You can't disappear and leave me with nothing. We were supposed to get married. We were. Bridget stepped forward. You're crazy. Who does this? Who takes an engagement ring back? I didn't take anything that wasn't mine. We weren't married. It was a family heirloom that comes back if the engagement ends. It ended. The ring came back. You're gonna regret this, Bridget said. I doubt it. Fiona started crying. Jensen, please, I'm sorry. The concert thing was dumb, but you can't throw away 4 years over one mistake. I looked at her and felt nothing. You told me your sister deserved it more, that I was just gonna stand there while you two actually enjoyed it. Those were your exact words. I didn't mean it like that. Yeah, you did. I turned and walked back toward the elevators. Security stepped forward to escort them out. This isn't over, Fiona shouted. I kept walking. The elevator doors closed. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 2 days later, I got served at work. Fiona had found some bargain bin lawyer willing to write up a demand letter, claiming I owed her damages for the sudden move, emotional distress, and the ring. Owen's brother looked it over and called me that afternoon. This is garbage. The ring's a conditional gift. Condition wasn't met. The apartment was in your name. She's got nothing. He sent a response letter that politely pointed out, I had 8 months of documented grocery receipts and utility payments that could easily be framed as supporting her unemployed sister. The demand letter went away within a week. But Bridget wasn't done being a pain. About a week after the lobby thing, I started getting weird calls at work. Someone would call the main line, ask to speak to me, then hang up when transferred. It happened 4 or 5 times before our receptionist, Dana, started screening. There's a woman who keeps calling for you, Dana told me. Won't give her name, won't leave a message. Sounds pretty hostile, honestly. I had a pretty good idea who it was. Bridget had nothing but time, and apparently decided to spend it making my work life annoying. Then, the social media stuff started. Fiona posted a long rant on Instagram about narcissistic partners and emotional abandonment. She didn't use my name directly, but she dropped enough details that mutual friends figured it out within hours. The post got about 200 likes and a flood of sympathetic comments from people who only knew her version. A few people from our shared friend group reached out asking for my side. I gave them the short answer. Most of them got it immediately. A couple thought I overreacted. One guy I barely knew sent me a long message about how I needed to work on my communication skills. I blocked him too. Here's the thing about these situations. Some people will always take the other side, no matter what. They've already decided who the bad guy is and nothing changes their mind. I stopped caring what any of them thought. The last thing happened over the next 2 months. Owen kept me posted through his network. Fiona and Bridget had moved.
My husband wanted my sister to be his wife for a day. His brother wanted me for life. My husband Damien had this way of dropping bombs like he was asking me to pass the salt. We were eating dinner, pasta I'd made after a 12-hour day at the firm because Damien said he was too tired to cook even though he'd been home since 3. I was twirling spaghetti around my fork when he said, So my 10-year reunion is next month and I need Nikki to come with me. I kept chewing because I assumed I'd misheard him. Nikki was my younger sister, prettier than me by conventional standards, thinner than me by 15 pounds, and unemployed by choice for the last 2 years because she was finding herself on my dime. I paid her rent. I paid her car insurance. I paid for the highlights she got every 6 weeks because she said dark roots made her feel less confident. I didn't realize I was also paying for her to attend my husband's high school reunion too. I swallowed my pasta and said, Why would Nikki be coming to your reunion? Damien didn't even look up from his phone. Because I need her there, he said. Like that explained everything. I set my fork down and waited for him to elaborate because surely there was more to this sentence. There wasn't. He just kept scrolling through whatever app had his attention more than I did. Damien, I said. And he finally looked up with that expression he always wore when I was about to inconvenience him with questions. Why do you need my sister at your high school reunion instead of your actual wife? He sighed like I was being exhausting. Like I was the one who'd just said something insane over pasta. Because I told everyone I married her, he said. Back when we first started dating. My buddies met her once at that barbecue and they assumed she was my girlfriend. I never corrected them. I stared at him. I kept staring at him. I was waiting for the part where he laughed and said he was kidding. Where this became some weird joke I didn't find funny but could at least categorize as humor. That part never came. You told your friends you married my sister. I repeated slowly, making sure I understood the words coming out of his mouth. It's not a big deal, he said, picking his fork back up like we were done discussing this. It was easier than explaining. And honestly, babe, you know how those guys are. They're shallow. If they remember Nikki being hot and they've spent 10 years thinking I locked that down. I can't show up with someone different and explain that actually I married the other one. The other one. I'd graduated top of my class at law school. I'd made partner at 33. I'd bought us this house, the cars in our driveway, and every piece of furniture Damien was currently sitting on. And I was the other one. I could feel something cold spreading through my chest, but I kept my voice steady because that's what I did. I stayed calm. I was reasonable. I didn't make scenes. So your solution, I said, is to bring my sister as your fake wife to a reunion full of people I'll never meet. And I'm supposed to just be okay with that? Damien reached across the table and grabbed my hand like he was comforting me through my own confusion. It's one night, he said, squeezing my fingers. Nobody will ever know. These people don't matter. I'll make it up to you, I promise. We'll do a nice dinner after, just us. Whatever restaurant you want. He smiled at me with those blue eyes that used to make my stomach flip, and I realized something that should have been obvious years ago. He thought I was stupid. He thought I was so desperate to keep him happy that I'd agree to anything if he just promised me a nice dinner afterward. And the worst part? He was probably right. He'd been training me to accept less since the day we met. I don't know, Damien, I said, and I watched his face change from charm to irritation in half a second. It just feels weird. Why can't you just tell them the truth? He pulled his hand back. Because I've been lying for 10 years, Carissa. What am I supposed to say now? Hey guys, funny story, I actually married her boring older sister who works all the time. That's humiliating. Boring, older, works all the time. Each word landed like a small punch to the chest, but I didn't react because I never reacted. I just absorbed it and kept functioning. That was my role in this marriage. Provider, absorber, the other one. Besides, Damien continued, Nikki already said yes. She's excited about it. She said it sounds fun. I blinked. You already asked her? Before asking me? He shrugged. I needed to make sure she was available first. Logistics. My sister had agreed to pretend to be my husband's wife. My sister, who I'd been financially supporting for 2 years, who called me crying every month about how hard her life was, who I'd given everything to because that's what big sisters did. She'd said yes to this without even calling me first. Damien must have seen something in my face because his expression softened into that fake concern he was so good at. Babe, don't be upset. Nikki said you should be flattered that she's willing to help. She's doing this for us. For you, really. So I can network and maybe finally land something better than that cashier job you're always complaining about. I wasn't complaining about his cashier job. I was complaining about the fact that he'd had 4 cashier jobs in 3 years and quit each one because his managers didn't respect him. I was complaining about funding his life while he figured out what he wanted to be when he grew up at 34 years old. But somehow that had become me being unsupportive. Somehow everything always became my fault. One night, Damien said again, watching me carefully now, seeing just how much more he needed to push. Nobody gets hurt. And then we never talk about it again. Okay. I nodded. I agreed to let Nikki pretend to be Damien's wife for one night at his reunion. I told myself it was harmless, just an embarrassing lie he needed help covering up. But something about how quickly Nikki said yes kept nagging at me. How she already knew the date before I did. How comfortable Damien seemed asking his wife to step aside for her own sister. I decided I wasn't going to sit back and watch from the sidelines. I was going to insert myself right into their little rehearsals and see exactly how they acted when the wife they were replacing was standing in the room. I decided to help them rehearse because I wanted to see their faces when the wife they were pretending didn't exist, walked into the room and offered to participate. I wanted to watch them squirm. I wanted Nikki to look guilty and Damien to stumble over his words, and both of them to realize how insane this whole situation was. So I came home early from work the next day and found them in my living room going over their story, and I said, I figured I could help, give you feedback on what looks believable. They barely looked up. Damien said, sure, babe, and went right back to whatever Nikki was saying. I sat down in the chair across from them and waited for the awkwardness to settle in. It never did. They just kept going like I was part of the furniture in the house I paid for with money I earned while both of them contributed nothing. Okay, so when they ask how we met, Damien said, leaning toward Nikki with his elbows on his knees, I'll say I saw you across the room at a mutual friend's birthday party, and I knew right then I had to talk to you. I felt my whole body go rigid. That was how Damien and I met. I was standing by the window and he walked up and said I looked like I was plotting my escape, and I laughed and we talked for 3 hours, and he asked for my number before I left. Wait, I said, and they both glanced at me like I'd interrupted something important. That's our story. That's how you and I actually met. The night that started our entire relationship. Damien shrugged. Exactly. I already know it by heart, so I won't mess up the details. Makes it easier. You want to use the story of how you met your wife to pretend you married someone else. You don't see anything wrong with that? Not really. It's practical. I turned to Nikki. And you're okay with this? Pretending you had the night that I actually had? The night I've told you about a dozen times because I thought my sister would care about the most important moment of my life? Nikki examined her nails. I mean, it's not like you own a story, Carissa. Things happen to lots of people the same way. It's not that deep. It happened to me. Specifically. With him. Your brother-in-law. And now we're borrowing it for one night. You'll get it back. She said it like I was being stingy with a sweater. Damien turned back to Nikki like the conversation was over. So after the party, I texted you the next day and asked if you wanted to get coffee. And I said yes, but I made you wait 3 days before we actually went, Nikki said, smiling at him like this was a fond memory she actually had. Because I didn't want to seem too eager. That was exactly what I did. I made him wait because my roommate told me 3 days was the minimum for not looking desperate. Nikki knew this story because I told her years ago, late at night, when I thought I was sharing something precious with my little sister. And now she was reciting it back to my husband like it belonged to her. I told you that story in confidence, I said to Nikki, when we were close. When I thought you actually cared about my life. Damien let out a loud sigh and turned to face me fully. You know what this is really about? You're so used to being the boss at work that you can't let anyone else have anything without controlling it. Everything has to go through Carissa. Everything has to be approved by Carissa. We can't even have a conversation without you hovering over it like a manager. This isn't about control. This is about you giving away my memories. See, there you go again. Your memories, your story, your life. He shook his head. Not everything belongs to you just because you were present for it. I was there too. It's my story as much as yours, and I can tell it however I want. Nikki nodded. He has a point. You can't copyright a relationship. I tried a different approach. Okay, well, what about the proposal? What are you going to say when people ask about that? Rooftop restaurant downtown, Damien said without hesitation. I had the ring hidden in my jacket pocket all night and I was so nervous I could barely eat. Then after dessert, I got down on one knee and the whole restaurant clapped. My engagement, my proposal, the happiest night of my life reduced to a script for my sister to memorize. That's literally what you did for me, I said, and my voice cracked in a way I hated. That's my proposal. I cried. You cried. The waiter brought us free champagne. I called my mom from the restaurant because I couldn't wait to tell her. That memory is mine, Damien. Ours. How can you just hand it to someone else? Damien's face twisted into something ugly. You know what, Carissa? You've always been jealous of Nikki. Ever since you were kids. She got more attention, she got more dates, she got more everything. And you've never gotten over it. He gestured at my sister. This isn't about the reunion. This is about you still competing with her after 30 years. I'm not competing with anyone. I'm asking why my husband is teaching my sister how to be me. Because she's willing to help without making it a federal case. He turned to Nikki with a softened expression. Unlike some people. Nikki reached over and squeezed his arm supportively. It's okay. She doesn't get it. You think this is easy for me? Damien's voice rose suddenly, like he was the one being wronged. I have to go back to these people and lie to their faces all night. I have to pretend my whole life turned out different than it did. But sure, let's focus on how hard this is for you. Let's make it about Carissa's feelings like we always do. I stared at him. You created this situation. You're the one who lied for 10 years. And I'm trying to fix it without blowing up my entire social network. But you can't give me one night. After everything I do around here, you can't give me one single night without making it weird. 1. What exactly do you do around here? The question hung in the air. Damien's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Nikki jumped in. He supports you emotionally. He's here when you come home from your stressful job. He manages the house while you're working all the time. She said it like she was listing his accomplishments at a job interview. Not everything is about money, Carissa. I looked around at the house I paid for, the furniture I bought, the electricity and water and internet that came out of my account every month. Damien hadn't had a steady job in 3 years. The last time he managed the house, he forgot to pay the water bill and we got a shut-off notice. I already talked to Mom about this, Nikki added casually. She said you'd probably overreact. She thinks it's actually kind of sweet that Damien cared enough about his friend's opinions to keep up the story this long. You talked to our mother about this before I even knew it was happening? I needed advice. She gets it. I don't know why you can't. Damien seized on this immediately. See? Your own mother understands. Your own sister is willing to help. The only person with a problem is you. He paused and tilted his head. What does that tell you? I didn't have an answer. Or I had too many answers and none of them would come out right. Let's just keep practicing, Nikki said, dismissing me entirely. We don't have that much time left. They went back to it like I'd given them permission to continue robbing me in broad daylight. Damien walked Nikki through our first anniversary and the trip we took to the coast, and the time I surprised him at work with lunch. All things that happened to me. All moments I thought belonged to us. At one point I tried to interject again, to point out that the restaurant on our anniversary was French, not Italian, and Damien cut me off. Oh, here we go, he said, pitching his voice high in a cruel imitation of mine. Actually, Damien, that's not exactly right. Actually, Damien, you're telling it wrong. Actually, Damien, let me correct you in front of everyone like I always do. He looked at Nikki and they both laughed at me in my house. I was just trying to help you get the details right, I said quietly. We don't need your help, Nikki said, still smiling from the impression. We've got it handled. Why don't you go do some work or something? Isn't that what you're good at? I told myself to let it go. This was my husband and my sister. They were just stressed about the reunion. None of it meant anything. I was being sensitive. I went upstairs to change and gave myself 5 minutes to calm down. I washed my face, took deep breaths, told myself I was overreacting just like everyone kept saying. I was halfway down the stairs when I heard Nikki giggle. Not her normal laugh, but something softer. Private. I stopped on the landing and looked through the railing, and what I saw made my whole body go cold. Damien had his hand on Nikki's face. His thumb was tracing her cheekbone, and she was leaning into it with her eyes half closed and their faces were inches apart. They were about to kiss. My husband and my sister in my living room in my house. I must have made a sound because they jumped apart like someone fired a gun. Nikki's face went red and Damien's hands flew up and they both started talking at once. It's not what it looks like, Damien said. We were just rehearsing, Nikki said. In case anyone asks about us being affectionate. I stood on the stairs looking down at them, and they looked back up with matching panic, trying very hard to become innocents. Right, I said slowly. Rehearsal. Damien's face relaxed into relief. Exactly. We got carried away practicing. It didn't mean anything. Nikki nodded quickly. We have to look like a real couple. That's literally all it was. I walked downstairs and sat back in my chair and watched them watch me, waiting to see what I would do. And I did nothing. I let them think I bought it, because I needed time to figure out what was actually happening before I said something I couldn't take back. But I wasn't overreacting anymore. Something was very wrong and I wasn't going to sleep on it. I wasn't going to give them time to align their stories or practice their excuses. Damien first while the panic was still fresh. Then Nikki, alone, without him there to feed her lines. If neither of them cracked, I'd find someone else in his life who'd seen what I was too blind to notice. Someone who owed him nothing. Someone with no reason to protect him. The truth was coming out tonight one way or another. Nikki left an hour later, and I followed Damien upstairs without saying a word. He went into the bathroom to brush his teeth like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just watched him almost kiss my sister. Like this was any other regular night in our marriage. I waited until he came out, and then I stepped in front of the bedroom door. "Move," he said. "No." He blinked at me like I'd spoken another language. In 10 years of marriage, I'd never blocked a door. I'd never stood in his way. And I'd never been anything but accommodating and reasonable and easy to walk around. "Carissa, I'm tired. Move. You're not sleeping until you tell me what's going on with you and Nikki." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We already explained that. It was rehearsal. You said you understood." I lied. "I don't understand anything. I don't understand why my husband had his hands on my sister's face. I don't understand why she was leaning into him like she'd done it 100 times before. I don't understand why you two looked more comfortable together than you've looked with me in years." Damien tried to step around me, and I moved with him. His jaw tightened. "You're being crazy right now. You know that, right? You're acting like a crazy person. Then explain it to me so I stop being crazy. Tell me one thing that makes sense." "I already told you. We were practicing looking like a couple. That's literally all it was." "Then why did you jump apart like I caught you doing something wrong? If it was just practice, you would have laughed it off. You wouldn't have panicked." He threw his hands up. "What do you want me to say? That I'm sleeping with your sister? Is that what you need to hear so you can feel justified in this little meltdown you're having? Are you?" The question hung between us. Damien stared at me, and I stared back, and for 3 seconds neither of us breathed. "I can't believe you'd even ask me that." His voice went quiet and wounded like I was the one who'd hurt him. "After all these years together. After everything we've built. You're going to stand there and accuse me of sleeping with Nikki because we got a little too into character during a rehearsal?" You didn't answer the question. "Because the question is insane." He was yelling now, and I didn't flinch. "No, Carissa. No, I'm not sleeping with your sister. Happy? Can I go to bed now?" He tried to push past me, and I grabbed his arm. My fingers dug into his bicep, and he stopped moving and looked down at my hand like he couldn't believe I was touching him without permission. "Let go of me. Not until you look me in the eyes and tell me there's nothing between you two." He yanked his arm free, and his whole face changed. His lip curled up on one side, and his eyes went flat and cold, and he looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of his shoe. "You want to know what there is between us? Relief. That's what. Relief that I get to spend time with someone who doesn't interrogate me every time I breathe. Relief that I get to be around a woman who actually makes me feel good instead of making me feel like a failure every single day. I have never called you a failure. You don't have to. It's in everything you do. The way you sigh when you pay the bills. The way you mention your job every 5 minutes. The way you look at me like I'm a problem you're too tired to solve." He stepped closer, and his voice dropped. "Nikki doesn't look at me like that. Nikki thinks I'm worth something. Nikki doesn't pay your bills. See? There it is. Everything comes back to money with you. You can't even have a conversation without reminding me that you're the one with the checkbook. I'm reminding you that I'm the one with the checkbook because you seem to have forgotten who funds your life while you spend your days rehearsing romance with my sister." Damien's nostrils flared, and his mouth pressed into a thin, hard line. "You know what? I'm done. If you can't trust me after 10 years, then maybe we shouldn't be married anymore." The words landed exactly how he meant them to. A threat. A weapon. The nuclear option he knew I'd been avoiding my entire marriage. "Is that what you want?" I asked. "Divorce? I want a wife who doesn't treat me like a suspect. If you can't be that, then yeah. Maybe divorce is exactly what I want." He pushed past me, and this time I let him. He grabbed a pillow and a blanket from the closet and walked out without looking back. I heard him go downstairs. Heard the couch creak as he threw himself onto it. Heard the TV turn on because even in the middle of a fight, he couldn't go 5 minutes without a screen. I stood in our bedroom doorway and realized something important. He hadn't denied it. He'd yelled. He'd deflected. He'd threatened divorce. But he never once looked me in the eyes and said there was nothing between him and Nikki. He couldn't. Because there was. I grabbed my keys and my purse and walked out the front door without telling him where I was going. He didn't ask. He didn't even look up from the TV. Nikki's apartment was 20 minutes away. I knew the route by heart because I'd driven there dozens of times with groceries when she said she couldn't afford food, with furniture when she said her place looked too empty, with a check for her security deposit when she first moved in because she'd blown through her savings on a trip to Cabo with friends. She called me crying 2 years ago, saying she was about to be homeless. I co-signed her lease. I covered her security deposit. I set up automatic transfers for her rent because she said dealing with money stressed her out. 2 years. $24,000. Plus her car insurance. Plus her phone bill. Plus random checks whenever she said she was struggling. I added it up once and stopped because the number made me sick. And the whole time I was funding her life, she was using that freedom to sleep with my husband. Every hour I spent at work to cover her bills was an hour she spent in my house with Damien. I parked in front of her building and took the stairs 2 at a time. It was almost 11 at night and I didn't care. I banged on her door hard enough that her neighbor opened theirs to see what was happening. "Nikki, open the door, now." I heard movement inside. Footsteps. Then her voice, high and nervous. "Carissa? What are you doing here? Open the door or I'll keep knocking until someone calls the cops." The lock clicked and the door opened 3 inches. Nikki's face appeared in the gap, looking pale and scared. It's late. Can we talk tomorrow? No. I pushed the door hard and she stumbled backward as I walked into the apartment I funded. We're talking right now. You can't just barge in here. I pay your rent. I can do whatever I want. I looked around at the furniture I'd helped her pick out. The TV I'd bought her for Christmas. The couch where she probably sat texting my husband while I was at work paying for all of it. How long? Nikki wrapped her arms around herself. How long what? Don't play dumb with me. How long have you been sleeping with Damien? I'm not sleeping with Damien. I told you it was just rehearsal. Why won't you believe me? Because I saw your face when he touched you. I saw how natural it looked. That wasn't acting, Nikki. That was muscle memory. That was something you've done so many times your body did it without thinking. You're imagining things. Am I? Then explain why you know so much about my husband. Explain why you two have inside jokes I've never heard. Explain why he defends you more than he's ever defended me. Nikki's eyes darted toward her phone on the counter, looking for backup, looking for Damien to tell her what to say. He's not coming to save you, I said. I left him on the couch. It's just you and me, sister to sister. Tell me the truth. There's nothing to tell. Fine. Then tell me this. I stepped closer and watched her step back. What's the birthmark on his left hip shaped like? Nikki's face went white. For 1 second, she forgot to lie, and I saw the answer in her eyes before she covered it up. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. You know exactly what I'm talking about because you've seen it. You've touched it. You've been close enough to my husband's body to know things only his wife should know. He showed me a photo once. It was a joke. Damien has never taken a photo of that birthmark in his life. He's self-conscious about it. He barely lets me see it. I laughed, and it sounded unhinged even to me. But you know what it looks like because you've been in bed with him. How long, Nikki? How long have you been sleeping with my husband in the apartment I pay for? She didn't answer. She just stood there with her arms wrapped around herself and tears starting to form in her eyes. The same tears she'd used 100 times to get out of trouble. The same performance she'd been running since we were kids. I'm done, I said. Your rent payment stops today. Your car insurance stops today. Everything I've been paying for stops today. You want to take my husband? Fine. But you're going to do it without my money. Carissa, wait. You can't just cut me off. I don't have anywhere to go. Should have thought about that before you decided to destroy my marriage. I walked out and slammed the door behind me. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my keys. I sat in my car for 5 minutes just breathing, just trying to process what I'd confirmed. My husband, my sister, in my house, on my money, behind my back. And they still expected me to stay home while they played happy couple at his reunion. That's when the idea hit me. Damien wanted to bring my sister as his fake wife. Fine. Then I'd bring his brother as my date. Jackson. The one who'd done everything right while Damien floated through life on charm and other people's money. Jackson had started his own business at 25. He owned his house outright. He'd offered Damien a job 3 different times, and Damien had turned him down each time because he said he couldn't work for his brother. The truth was Damien couldn't stand being around someone who made him look bad just by existing. They barely spoke anymore. Jackson came to Christmas and Thanksgiving, and that was it. He was always polite to me at family events, and that was enough to convince me to go through with this. I'd walk into that reunion on Jackson's arm and watch Damien's face when he realized his wife showed up with the one person he could never measure up to. I pulled out my phone and found Jackson's number. We'd exchanged contacts years ago, but never actually texted. I stared at the screen for a long time before typing. Hi, Jackson. This is Carissa. I know this is random, but I need a favor. A big one. Can we meet tomorrow? Please don't tell Damien I reached out. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. A minute passed, then 2. I was about to start the car when my phone buzzed. Is everything okay? I typed back. No. That's why I need your help. 3 dots appeared. Then his response came telling me to meet him for coffee tomorrow morning. Jackson met me at the coffee shop the next morning and listened to everything without interrupting once. When I finished, he didn't tell me I was crazy. He didn't make excuses for his brother. He just asked what I needed. And what I needed was simple. Damien had spent 10 years making me feel invisible. He'd spent months sneaking around with my sister while I paid for their lives. Now I was going to make him feel exactly what I felt. Paranoid. Jealous. Desperate for answers he wasn't going to get. Jackson was happy to help. The next morning I was putting on mascara when Damien appeared in the bathroom doorway. You're up early. His eyes moved over my outfit. The nice blouse. The jewelry I never wore anymore. Where are you going? Coffee with Jackson. The name landed like a grenade. His whole body went rigid. Jackson was the one person in the world who made Damien feel like nothing. Their parents had spent 30 years comparing them, and Damien lost every single time. Jackson built a company while Damien couldn't keep a cashier job. Jackson owned his house while Damien lived in mine. Every family dinner reminded him he was the disappointment and he'd hated his brother for it since they were kids. Cancel it. I kept applying mascara. No. I wasn't asking. He stepped into the bathroom and grabbed my phone off the counter before I could stop him. What's his number? I'll cancel it myself. Give me my phone, Damien. Or what? He held it above his head like we were children fighting over a toy. What are you going to do about it? I set down my mascara and looked at him. Really looked at him. This man I'd given 10 years to. This man who couldn't even let me have coffee without throwing a tantrum. I'm going to walk out of this house. I'm going to meet your brother. And when I get back, you're going to give me my phone and apologize for acting like a child. I grabbed my keys off the counter. Keep the phone. I'll get a new one. His arm dropped. Carissa, wait. I didn't wait. Jackson was already at the coffee shop when I arrived. He stood when he saw me and pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than it should have. He smelled expensive, clean, nothing like Damien's cheap cologne that had irritated my nose for a decade. You okay? He asked as we sat down. You look upset. Your brother took my phone hostage because I wanted to have coffee with you. Jackson's jaw tightened. That sounds like him. Does it? Because for 10 years I thought I was married to a reasonable person. Turns out I was married to a toddler who throws fits when he doesn't get his way. He's always been like that. He just hides it well at first. Jackson slid a coffee across the table. I ordered your usual. Hope that's okay. How do you know my usual? You've ordered the same thing at every family gathering for 5 years. Vanilla latte, extra shot, oat milk. He shrugged. I pay attention. Something in my chest cracked open. Damien didn't know my coffee order. We'd been married 10 years and he still asked me every single time like the information wouldn't stick. I told Jackson everything. The proposal story, the almost kiss on the couch, the birthmark slip, the way Damien had been gaslighting me for months while carrying on with my sister right under my nose. By the time I finished, my coffee was cold and my voice was hoarse. I want him to feel what I felt, I said. Paranoid, jealous, going crazy wondering what's happening. How? I need you around. Pick me up for dinners. Text me when he's watching. Make him wonder. Jackson was quiet for a moment. His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand. I'm in, he said. Whatever you need. When I got home 3 hours later, Damien was sitting in the dark living room like a horror movie villain. 3 hours. His voice was flat. You were gone 3 hours. We had a lot to talk about. About what? About me? About how terrible I am? Not everything is about you, Damien. I held out my hand. Phone. He pulled it from his pocket and threw it at me. Actually threw it. I caught it against my chest. There's your precious phone. Check your messages. I'm sure Jackson's been texting you nonstop like the desperate loser he is. The only desperate person in this room is you. I walked past him toward the stairs. I'm taking a shower. Try not to have a meltdown while I'm gone. The first dinner with Jackson was on Friday. I wore the black dress Damien said was too much for a Tuesday. Did my hair the way I used to before I stopped trying. When I came downstairs, Damien stood up so fast his chair fell over. No, absolutely not. Yes, absolutely yes. You're not leaving this house dressed like that to meet my brother. Watch me. He grabbed my arm, hard. Hard enough that I knew there would be bruises tomorrow. I said no. And I said yes. Let go of me. Make me. I looked at his hand on my arm, then at his face. Then I screamed. One loud, sharp scream that echoed through the house and probably reached the neighbors. He let go instantly. What the hell is wrong with you? Nothing. I just wanted to see how fast you'd release me if you thought someone might hear. I smoothed my dress. Now you know. And now I know exactly how to handle you. Jackson's headlights swept across the window. I walked out without looking back. Dinner was incredible. Not the food, though, that was good too. The conversation. The way Jackson asked about my work and actually listened. The way he remembered details from years ago that Damien had never bothered to learn. The way he looked at me like I was someone worth looking at. Friday again? He asked when he dropped me off. Friday again. The second dinner was even better. We closed down the restaurant talking about everything and nothing. He kissed my cheek when he walked me to the door and I felt it for hours afterward. The third dinner was when everything changed. I came home at midnight expecting Damien to be pacing or sulking or throwing things. Instead, I found him on the couch with Nikki curled up against his side. Her shoes were off. Her head was on his shoulder. They were watching a movie like this was completely normal. Oh hey. Damien didn't even look at me. How was your date? I stood in the doorway trying to process what I was seeing. My fiancé's phone rang during our wedding vows with the most romantic, spicy ringtone I'd ever heard. I was standing at the altar, crying happy tears, looking into the eyes of the man who made me feel seen like nobody ever had. He started his vows, talking about how I was the sun of his solar system. Right as he said those words, his phone started ringing. Pony, by Ginewine blared through the church. Every single person turned to stare. Norman's face went white. He fumbled with his pocket while the grinding beat echoed off the walls. Finally, he silenced it. Who was that? I asked. Wrong number. Probably spam. Norman, that's a custom ringtone. You assigned that song to someone specific. Show me the phone. He pulled it closer to his chest. It's nobody. Can we just continue? No. We can't. I grabbed my dress and walked off the altar. Norman followed me into the church lobby. Both families rushed after us. Was it another woman? I asked. No, I swear. Then who was it? Norman's mom pushed through the crowd. It's his cousin Rebecca. She's overseas. I stared at her. He has that song saved for his cousin? She stuttered about an inside joke. That's disgusting, and you know you're lying. I tried to grab the phone. He jerked away and it slipped, flying into the decorative fountain. The screen went black. Norman actually looked relieved. My maid of honor, Claire, stopped everyone. If that call was just your cousin, why are you happy the phone is dead? I want the truth, I said, or this wedding is over. Norman was shaking. I can't. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, he broke. The woman's name is Vanessa. She's the mother of my child. The words didn't register. What? I have a son. He's 4 years old. I never told you. My family exploded. I couldn't breathe. But why does she have that ringtone? I said it years ago. She never calls, so I forgot to change it. That doesn't explain why you were panicked. Norman looked sick. 3 months ago, Vanessa came back to town. We slept together. Once. My dad lunged forward, but my brothers held him back. Why was she calling you today? His mother answered. She's pregnant. My knees buckled. Claire caught me. I pulled out my own phone. Give me her number. Right now. Norman gave it to me. I called on speaker. The lobby went silent. Hello? A woman's voice answered. This is Norman's fiancé. I'm at the altar right now. Is it true? Long pause. He didn't tell you? Tell me what? Vanessa laughed, tired. I'm not pregnant. I called to warn you. Norman's been telling people I am, so he has an excuse to stay connected to me. He's been showing up at my apartment for months saying he wants to be a family again. I told him I'd call you if he didn't stop. So there's no second pregnancy? No. But everything else is true. The son, the affair, all of it. I hung up. Norman started talking fast. Baby, I can explain. You lied about a pregnancy to cover up stalking your ex? It wasn't stalking. You have a 4-year-old son you hid from me for 2 years. You cheated on me 3 months before our wedding. And when you got caught, you invented a fake pregnancy. He reached for my hand. I stepped back. The wedding is off. His mother started wailing. His father dragged him toward the exit. My family surrounded me like a wall. Claire helped me out of the church. I was still wearing my dress when we got to her car. She didn't ask where I wanted to go. She just drove. We ended up at a diner. I sat in a booth in my wedding gown eating pancakes at 4 p.m., mascara running down my face. The waitress just kept refilling my coffee. Claire sat across from me. What do you need? I need to know how I missed all of this. You didn't miss anything. He hid it. That's not the same thing. I thought about the past 2 years. Every time Norman got quiet when his phone buzzed. Every business trip that seemed too long. Every time his mother looked at me with something that wasn't quite warmth. They all knew. I finished my pancakes and walked out into the parking lot still wearing my dress. What now? Claire asked. I looked down at the white fabric, the beading I'd spent months choosing, the train dragging through gravel. Now I take this off, I said. And I never look back. Claire's apartment was smaller than the place I'd shared with Norman, but it felt safer somehow. I sat on her gray couch in my wedding dress and stared at the coffee table without really seeing it. My phone kept lighting up on the cushion next to me. Norman's name flashed across the screen again and again. Then my mom's name. Then my dad's. Then numbers I didn't recognize. I picked up the phone and turned it face down, but I could still feel it buzzing against my palm through the fabric of my dress. Claire brought me a glass of water and set it on the table in front of me. I didn't drink it. She sat in the chair across from me and didn't say anything. The silence felt heavy, but not uncomfortable. I looked down at the white beading on my dress and thought about how I'd tried on 17 dresses before finding this one. Norman had come to one of the fittings even though everyone said the groom wasn't supposed to see the dress. He'd told me I looked beautiful, and I'd felt so lucky that he couldn't wait. Now I wondered if he'd been checking his phone the whole time, texting Vanessa while I spun around in white fabric. My phone buzzed again. I turned it over and saw Norman's face on the screen, the photo from our trip to the mountains last fall. I'd taken that picture right after he'd told me he loved me for the first time. I pressed the power button and held it until the screen went black. The dress felt too tight suddenly. I stood up and reached behind me for the zipper, but my hands were shaking too much to grab it. Claire got up and walked over without me having to ask. She unzipped it slowly and the fabric loosened around my ribs. I could breathe again. I stepped out of the dress and stood there in my white underwear and strapless bra, looking at the pile of expensive fabric on Claire's floor. She picked it up carefully and started folding it. I watched her smooth out the wrinkles and arrange the train. She was treating it like it mattered even though we both knew I'd never wear it again. I sat back down on the couch in my underwear and pulled a throw blanket over my legs. Claire finished folding the dress and set it on the chair. She sat next to me and we didn't talk. The clock on her wall ticked past 7, then 8, then 9. I kept thinking about the past 2 years. Every time Norman's phone rang and he'd step into another room to answer it. Every weekend he said he had to work late. Every time his mom looked at me during family dinners with this expression I couldn't quite read. They all knew. His whole family knew he had a son, and they watched me plan a wedding and never said a word. I thought about Vanessa's voice on the phone, tired and matter of fact. She hadn't sounded angry or jealous. She'd sounded like someone who'd been dealing with Norman's lies for a long time and was just exhausted. I wondered what she'd told their son about his dad. I wondered if the kid knew Norman was supposed to get married today. The thought made my stomach hurt. Claire got up around midnight and came back with sweatpants and a t-shirt. I put them on and the dress stayed folded on the chair like a ghost. We sat on the couch and Claire asked me if I wanted to talk about it. I started going through everything in my head out loud. The business trip to Chicago that lasted 5 days when it should have been 3. The time I'd surprised Norman at his office and he'd seemed annoyed instead of happy. The way he always kept his phone face down on tables. The random Tuesday nights he said he had to help his brother move furniture or fix his dad's car. I'd believed all of it because why wouldn't I? People don't lie about helping their family. Except Norman did lie about his family. He lied about having a son. He lied about sleeping with Vanessa. He lied about her being pregnant. He'd probably lied about 100 other things I hadn't even figured out yet. Claire listened and didn't try to make me feel better with fake comfort. She just let me talk. Around 3 a.m, I finally stopped talking, and we sat there in silence. My eyes felt dry and scratchy. I was too tired to cry anymore. Claire brought me a pillow and another blanket, and I lay down on her couch. She went to her bedroom and I heard her door close softly. I stared at the ceiling and watched the shadows from the streetlight outside move across the white paint. I thought about how this morning I'd woken up excited to marry Norman. Now I was sleeping on my best friend's couch in borrowed clothes and my whole life was different. I woke up to sun coming through Claire's living room window. My neck hurt from the couch pillow and my mouth tasted awful. I reached for my phone before remembering I'd turned it off. I held the power button and waited for it to come back on. 17 missed calls, 12 from Norman, 3 from his mom, 2 from my mom. I had 14 text messages. I opened the one from Norman's mom first. It said we needed to talk about misunderstandings, and that Norman was devastated, and that I should give him a chance to explain properly. I deleted it. Norman's texts were long paragraphs about how sorry he was, and how he never meant to hurt me, and how we could work through this if I just gave him a chance. I didn't read all of them. I heard Claire moving around in her bedroom, and then she came out wearing her robe. She looked at my face and asked if I'd checked my phone. I nodded. She went to the kitchen and started making coffee without saying anything else. The smell filled the apartment and reminded me of Sunday mornings with Norman. We used to make breakfast together and read the news on our phones, and it had felt so normal and comfortable. Now I couldn't tell which parts of that had been real and which parts had been Norman playing a role. Claire brought me coffee in the blue mug she always used for guests. I wrapped my hands around it and felt the warmth. She sat in the chair with her own mug and told me I didn't owe anyone explanations right now. I knew she was right, but I also knew I couldn't hide at her apartment forever. Eventually, I'd have to deal with the wedding vendors and the apartment I shared with Norman, and all the practical pieces of a life I'd been building with someone who didn't exist. My phone rang and my dad's name showed up on the screen. I answered it and he asked where I was. I told him I was at Claire's. He said he and my mom were coming over. I said okay, and hung up. 20 minutes later, they were knocking on Claire's door. My mom hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe, and my dad stood behind her looking like he wanted to punch something. Claire let them in and made more coffee. We all sat in her small living room, and my parents told me that Norman's family had tried calling them last night. His dad had left a voicemail saying there had been a terrible misunderstanding, and that Norman loved me and wanted to make things right. My mom said she'd called back and told them there was no misunderstanding. Norman had lied and cheated and hidden a child. Those were facts, not misunderstandings. My dad said Norman's dad had tried to argue that Norman had been planning to tell me about his son after the wedding. My dad had hung up on him. I felt grateful that my parents were angry on my behalf because I was too tired to be angry anymore. I just felt empty. My mom asked what I needed and I didn't know how to answer. I needed the past 2 years to be different. I needed Norman to not be a liar. I needed to not feel this stupid for missing all the signs. But I couldn't say any of that, so I just shrugged. My brothers showed up an hour later with garbage bags full of my stuff. They'd gone to the church and collected everything from the bridal room, and then they'd gone to the apartment while Norman was out. My oldest brother set the bags down in Claire's entryway and told me they'd grabbed clothes and my laptop and some other things. He said Norman had come home while they were there, but they'd finished packing and left without talking to him. My middle brother said it had taken everything in him not to say something. I thanked them and they both hugged me. My youngest brother asked if I needed them to do anything else. I told them no. They left after making me promise to call if I needed anything. I looked at the garbage bags full of my life and felt overwhelmed. Claire helped me drag them into her bedroom and we started going through them. My brothers had grabbed things randomly. 3 pairs of shoes, but not the ones I wore most. 5 t-shirts, but none of my jeans. My laptop, but not the charger. I pulled out a framed photo of me and Norman from last Christmas and stared at it. We looked so happy. I set it face down on Claire's dresser and kept unpacking. By afternoon, I knew I had to start dealing with the practical mess. I found a notebook in one of the bags and sat at Claire's kitchen table. I started writing down everything that needed to be canceled or dealt with. The venue, the caterer, the photographer, the florist, the honeymoon flights and hotel, the apartment lease that was in both our names, the joint bank account we'd opened for wedding expenses, The list kept getting longer and I felt my chest getting tight. Each item represented something I'd planned and looked forward to. The venue where we were supposed to have our reception. The flowers I'd spent hours choosing. The honeymoon in Italy that Norman had suggested because he knew I'd always wanted to go. Every single thing on the list was a piece of the future I'd thought I had. I got to the bottom of the page and added one more item. Wedding dress alterations I'd already paid for. I'd never need the final fitting now. I put the pen down and put my head in my hands. Claire came over and looked at the list. She didn't say anything for a minute. Then she suggested I call the wedding planner first. Valeria could help coordinate with all the vendors. I didn't have to make every call myself. I looked up at Claire and felt a rush of gratitude. I'd been so focused on the list that I'd forgotten I'd hired someone specifically to handle wedding logistics. I found Valeria's number in my phone and called before I could talk myself out of it. She answered on the second ring and said my name like a question. I told her the wedding was canceled and I needed help dealing with the vendors. There was a pause and then her voice came back softer. She said she'd heard what happened. One of the guests had called her yesterday to ask about getting their gift back. Valeria said she was so sorry and she wanted to help however she could. I felt my throat get tight, but I didn't cry. I told her about the list and asked if she could handle contacting everyone. She said most vendors had cancellation policies in their contracts. Some deposits would be lost, but she'd do her best to minimize the damage. She asked if I could write a brief statement she could share with the vendors so she didn't have to explain the details over and over. I said yes and thanked her. She told me to send the statement whenever I was ready, and that she'd start reaching out to vendors this week. We hung up and I felt a tiny bit of the weight lift. At least I wouldn't have to call the florist and explain that my fiancé had a secret child and a side relationship. Valeria could just say the wedding was canceled due to personal circumstances and leave it at that. That evening, I was sitting on Claire's couch trying to write the statement for vendors when the intercom buzzed. Claire got up to answer it and I heard Norman's voice through the speaker. He was asking to talk to me. Begging, really. His voice sounded desperate and I felt nothing. Claire told him to leave. He kept talking, saying things had gotten out of hand and he just needed 5 minutes to explain. Claire said if he didn't leave, she was calling the police. I heard him say my name through the speaker, pleading. Claire pressed the button to end the call and came back to the couch. She asked if I was okay. I nodded. I pulled out my phone and looked at Norman's texts again. He'd sent 6 more since this morning. All of them were variations of the same thing. He was sorry. He loved me. He wanted to fix this. He never meant for things to go this far. I read them all and felt that same emptiness. No anger, no sadness, just nothing. I opened a new message and typed that we would communicate only through email about practical matters like the apartment and our shared belongings. I hit send and put my phone down. 30 seconds later, it rang. Norman's face filled the screen. He was calling instead of respecting the boundary I'd just set. I stared at his photo for 3 rings. Then I blocked his number. The phone stopped ringing. I felt a small surge of something that might have been power. It wasn't much, but it was the first time since yesterday that I'd made a choice that was entirely mine. The next morning, my phone rang while I was still in bed at Claire's place. The screen showed a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. A woman's voice introduced herself as the venue manager. She said Valeria had contacted her about the cancellation, but she wanted to reach out personally. I sat up and waited for whatever bad news was coming. She explained they couldn't refund the deposit because the contract was clear about cancellations within 2 weeks of the event. My stomach dropped. Then she said they were willing to apply the full amount to a future event if I wanted to reschedule within a year. I actually laughed out loud. The sound came out harsh and bitter. She went quiet on the other end. I told her I appreciated the offer, but I wouldn't be getting married there or anywhere else anytime soon. She said she understood and that she was sorry about what happened. I thanked her and hung up. The idea that I'd ever want to walk back into that venue made me feel sick. I spent the rest of the morning trying to figure out what I actually owed and what I could get back. Claire made coffee and sat with me while I went through every contract and receipt. The numbers kept getting bigger. I called my cousin Nadia around noon. She's a lawyer who specializes in contracts. She said she could meet me that afternoon. I got dressed in actual clothes for the first time in days and took the bus to her office downtown. Nadia's assistant showed me to a conference room with big windows overlooking the city. Nadia came in a few minutes later carrying a legal pad. She hugged me first and then sat down across from me. I handed her the folder with all my wedding contracts. She put on her reading glasses and started going through each document. I watched her face for any sign of good news. She took notes and made small sounds while she read. After 20 minutes, she looked up and said most of the vendors had solid cancellation clauses. I was probably out about $15,000 in deposits that were clearly marked as non-refundable. The number hit me like a punch. $15,000 gone because Norman couldn't tell the truth. I felt physically sick. Nadia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She asked if I wanted to pursue any legal action against Norman. I could potentially sue for fraud or emotional distress. I thought about it for maybe 10 seconds. Then I told her I just wanted to be done with him. I didn't want months or years of court dates and lawyers and seeing his face. Nadia nodded like she expected that answer. She said she understood, but she'd put together some information for me anyway in case I changed my mind later. She pulled out a folder and explained what my options would be if I decided to go that route. I took the folder and thanked her. She didn't charge me for the consultation. She said family doesn't pay family. I left her office feeling both grateful and defeated. At least I knew where I stood financially now. 3 days after the wedding that didn't happen, I had to go back to work. I couldn't hide at Claire's apartment forever. I got up early and put on work clothes that felt strange after days in sweatpants. The bus ride felt too long. I kept thinking about what I'd say when people asked questions. My boss had texted saying to take all the time I needed, but I'd replied that I wanted to come back. Sitting around thinking about Norman was worse than being busy. I walked into the office and felt every eye turn toward me. People who normally said good morning looked away. My boss saw me and immediately came over. She pulled me into her office and closed the door. She said again that I could take more time. I told her I'd rather work than sit at home. She studied my face for a moment and then nodded. She said to let her know if I needed anything. I went to my desk and tried to focus on emails. My hands were shaking. Around 10, a coworker named Jessica stopped by my desk. She had this bright smile on her face. She said she saw the wedding was supposed to be last weekend and asked how married life was treating me. The words hung in the air between us. I felt my face get hot. I told her the wedding didn't happen. Her smile disappeared. She asked what I meant. I said it got canceled at the altar. Her expression went from confused to shocked to horrified in about 3 seconds. She started apologizing and backing away from my desk. I told her it was fine, but she kept saying sorry. Other people nearby had heard. I could feel them staring. I wanted to disappear into the floor. Jessica finally left and I put my head down and pretended to work. The rest of the day crawled by with people either avoiding me completely or giving me sad looks. I'd never been so happy to leave work in my life. That evening, I was scrolling through social media when a message popped up from someone named Milo. The name seemed familiar. I clicked on his profile and recognized him from pictures with Norman in college. My first thought was that he was reaching out to defend Norman or make excuses. The message said he needed to talk to me about something important. He said it was about Norman and he knew I probably didn't want to hear from any of his friends right now. But he promised he wasn't reaching out to defend him. Something about the way he wrote it seemed genuine. Not like he was making excuses. I stared at the message for a long time. Finally, I wrote back asking what he wanted to talk about. He replied almost immediately. He said it would be better to meet in person if I was willing. He suggested a coffee shop downtown. I told Claire about it and she said to meet him somewhere public and let her know where I was. I agreed to meet him the next day after work. The coffee shop was busy when I got there the next afternoon. Milo was already sitting at a corner table. He stood up when he saw me and shook my hand. He looked nervous. We both ordered coffee and sat down. He thanked me for meeting him. Then he said he'd been feeling guilty for months. I asked him why. He explained that Norman had told him about Vanessa and the kid last year. He said Norman mentioned it casually like it was something I already knew about. Milo had even asked Norman once how I felt about the whole situation with his son. Norman told him I was fine with it, and we were working on integrating his kid into our lives. Milo believed him. He said he only realized a few days ago that I'd had no idea. One of Norman's other friends had mentioned how shocked I must have been to find out at the altar. That's when Milo understood that Norman had been lying to everyone about what I knew. He looked miserable telling me this. Milo kept talking. He said Norman used to talk about me and Vanessa in this weird way. Like he was comparing us. He'd make comments about how different we were, how I was organized and driven and Vanessa was more spontaneous and emotional, how he got different things from each of us. At the time, Milo thought Norman was just talking about his past relationship versus his current one. But now looking back, it seemed like Norman was talking about 2 ongoing relationships. I felt cold listening to this. I asked Milo if he thought the hookup 3 months ago was really just once. Milo looked uncomfortable. He said he didn't know for sure, but Norman had mentioned seeing Vanessa multiple times in the past year. Always with some excuse about co-parenting or their son needing something. Milo had thought it was innocent at the time. Now he wasn't so sure. I sat back in my chair and felt the weight of it. The cheating probably wasn't one mistake. It was probably ongoing. I asked Milo why he was telling me all this now. He took a sip of his coffee and said Norman had called him yesterday. Norman spent 20 minutes painting himself as the victim, saying his private business got exposed unfairly, saying people were overreacting, saying I'd embarrassed him in front of everyone. Milo said Norman showed 0 real remorse. He was just mad that he got caught. Milo told Norman he was wrong and Norman got defensive and hung up on him. That's when Milo decided he couldn't stay silent anymore. He said he felt like he'd been part of the lie by not questioning things sooner. I told him it wasn't his fault. Norman had lied to everyone. Milo still looked guilty, but he nodded. We finished our coffee and I thanked him for telling me the truth. He said if I ever needed anything or wanted to talk to reach out. I left the coffee shop feeling worse than when I'd arrived. Every new piece of information just showed me how blind I'd been. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on Claire's couch staring at the ceiling. Finally, I grabbed my phone and started going through old photos. Pictures from the past 2 years with Norman. I looked at them differently now. In one photo from 6 months ago, Norman was checking his phone with this secretive expression. I'd thought nothing of it at the time. In another photo from a work trip he'd taken last spring, his smile looked forced. I remembered he'd been unreachable for hours that weekend. He'd blamed it on bad cell service. There were so many little things. Times he'd angled his phone away from me. Nights he'd come home later than expected with vague explanations about traffic or a work thing running long. Calls he'd taken in another room. I'd trusted him, so I'd never questioned any of it. Now every memory felt poisoned. I felt so stupid for missing all the signs. Claire heard me moving around and came out of her bedroom. She sat down next to me and asked what I was doing. I showed her the photos and told her about all the things I'd dismissed. She took my phone and set it down. She said I trusted him because that's what you're supposed to do in a relationship. She said his lying didn't mean I was stupid. It meant he was a liar. I wanted to believe her, but I still felt like I should have known something was wrong. We stayed up talking until almost 3 a.m. before I finally fell asleep. The apartment building looked the same as always, but walking up to it felt like approaching a crime scene. Claire parked her car and turned off the engine. She asked if I was ready, and I nodded even though I wasn't. We got out and headed toward the entrance. Norman was already waiting in the lobby. He stood up when he saw me and took a step forward with his arms slightly open. I stepped back before he could get close. His face did this hurt expression like I'd slapped him. Claire positioned herself between us and asked where we should start. Norman led us to the elevator without saying anything. The ride up to the 3rd floor felt endless. Nobody spoke. The doors opened and we walked down the familiar hallway to apartment 3B. Norman unlocked the door and I stepped inside a space that used to feel like home. Now it just felt like a place full of lies. I'd brought empty boxes and trash bags. Claire set them down by the door. Norman cleared his throat and started talking about how we should discuss things. I cut him off and pointed at the boxes. I told him we were here to divide belongings, not talk. He kept going anyway. He said he'd been scared to tell me about his son because he thought I'd leave. I stared at him. I told him I would have understood about a child from a previous relationship. Lots of people have kids from past relationships. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. But lying for 2 years was different. Cheating 3 months before our wedding was different. Norman actually tried to argue that the cheating just happened because Vanessa was emotional about co-parenting issues. Like that was supposed to make it better. Like being emotional was an excuse to sleep with your ex. Claire stepped forward and told Norman to stop making excuses. She said he needed to focus on dividing belongings, or she was calling my brothers to come handle it. Norman's face went pale at the mention of my brothers. He finally shut up. We spent the next 2 hours sorting through everything in complete silence. I moved through the apartment picking up items that were clearly mine. My books, my clothes, my grandmother's quilt. Norman kept trying to make eye contact, but I refused to look at him. Every item I touched reminded me of some moment in our relationship that turned out to be fake. The coffee mug I'd bought him for his birthday. The throw pillows we'd picked out together. The framed photo from a trip where he'd probably been texting Vanessa the whole time. I left everything we'd bought together. I didn't want any of it. Norman tried to insist I take the coffee maker we'd picked out on a vacation to the mountains. I snapped that I didn't want anything that would make me think of him every morning. He set it down and didn't argue. By the time we finished, I had 3 boxes of stuff. That's all I was taking from 2 years of living together. 3 boxes. Claire helped me carry them down to her car. Norman followed us and tried to say something as we loaded the trunk. I slammed it shut and got in the passenger seat without responding. Claire drove away, and I watched the building disappear in the side mirror. My mom called me that evening while I was unpacking at Claire's place. She sounded tired. She told me that Norman's mother had called her suggesting a meeting between our families to find a path forward. I almost laughed. My mom said she'd politely told Norman's mother that wouldn't be happening and asked her not to contact us again. The fact that his mom still thought there could be a path forward showed she understood nothing. There was no path. There was no forward. There was just a way. I thanked my mom and she asked how I was really doing. I told her I didn't know yet. She said that was okay and that she loved me. After we hung up, I sat on Claire's couch and realized I hadn't slept properly in days. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Norman at the altar. I saw his face when the phone rang. I saw his mother lying. I saw everything unraveling in front of 200 people. Claire suggested I talk to someone and gave me the number for Charlotte King, a therapist she'd heard good things about. I called the next morning and got an appointment for that afternoon. Charlotte's office was in a quiet building downtown. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with kind eyes and a direct way of speaking. She asked what brought me in, and I told her the whole story. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked what I needed to feel safe again. Not what happened or how I felt about it. What I needed to feel safe. The question caught me off guard. I admitted I was having trouble sleeping. She asked what was keeping me awake, and I said I kept replaying the moment at the altar over and over. She nodded and asked what I was looking for in those replays. I said I was trying to figure out how I missed everything. Charlotte leaned forward slightly and told me that wasn't the right question. The right question was why Norman chose to deceive me. She said I was angrier at myself than at him, and I needed to redirect that anger where it belonged. I felt tears starting and tried to stop them. Charlotte handed me tissues and said it was okay to be angry at myself, but I needed to understand that Norman deliberately deceived me. His deception said nothing about my intelligence or worth. It said everything about his character. We talked for the full hour, and I left feeling slightly less like I was drowning. The photographer emailed 2 days later. She said she still expected payment for the day even though the wedding didn't happen. She'd shown up and taken pictures of the ceremony before it fell apart. Her invoice was attached. I stared at the number and felt sick. I forwarded the email to Valeria and asked if there was anything she could do. Valeria called me within an hour. She said she'd reached out to the photographer and negotiated a reduced rate. The photographer could still use the pre-ceremony photos for her portfolio, so she was willing to accept 60% of the original cost. It was better than nothing. I agreed and thanked Valeria for handling it. She said she was sorry about everything and hoped I was taking care of myself. I said I was trying. That night, I made the mistake of checking social media. Norman had posted a status about going through a difficult time and learning from mistakes. Several people who didn't know what happened had commented with support. Someone wrote that everyone makes mistakes, and growth is what matters. Another person said they were proud of him for being vulnerable. I stared at the screen, feeling my blood pressure rise. He was painting himself as someone going through a hard time, not someone who'd lied and cheated and destroyed someone else's life. I wanted to comment and tell everyone the truth. I wanted to share screenshots of our text exchanges. I wanted to expose every lie, but I closed the app instead. Claire was right when she said engaging with him would only make things worse. He wasn't worth my energy anymore. I closed the app and put my phone face down on Claire's coffee table. She looked up from her laptop where she'd been working on something and asked if I was okay. I told her I was done looking at his stuff, done caring what story he told himself to sleep at night. She nodded and said that was probably healthy. Then she suggested something that caught me off guard. She said I should write out everything I wanted to say to Norman but never send it, just to get all the feelings out of my head and onto paper. I stared at her for a second because it seemed too simple to actually help, but she insisted it worked for her after a bad breakup years ago. She grabbed a notebook from her desk drawer and handed it to me with a pen. I took it and sat cross-legged on the couch, staring at the blank page for a while before I started writing. Once I started, I couldn't stop. I filled 7 pages with anger and hurt and questions I'd never get answers to. I wrote about the moment at the altar when everything shattered. I wrote about feeling stupid for missing signs that seemed obvious now. I wrote about his mother's lies and his fake pregnancy excuse and how he tried to hug me at the apartment like nothing had happened. I wrote things I wished I'd said when he was making excuses, sharp words that felt good to put on paper even if he'd never hear them. When I finished, my hand was cramping and my eyes were burning, but I felt lighter somehow. Claire asked if I wanted to keep the pages or get rid of them, and I said I wanted them gone. She led me to her fireplace and handed me a lighter. I watched the pages curl and blacken in the flames, and it felt surprisingly good to see all those words turn to ash. My dad called the next morning and asked if I wanted to get lunch. I said yes because I knew he was trying to help, even though neither of us really knew what to say about everything. We met at a sandwich place near his office, and he looked tired when he sat down across from me. He started talking before I could even open my menu. He apologized for not seeing through Norman, said he seemed like such a good guy who treated me well. His voice cracked a little when he said he should have known something was wrong. I reached across the table and put my hand on his. I told him Norman fooled everyone, not just me. I said Norman was good at lying. That was the whole problem. My dad nodded, but I could tell he still felt bad about it. We talked about other things while we ate, normal stuff about work and my brothers and my mom's new garden project. It felt good to have a conversation that wasn't entirely about the disaster at the altar. When we finished eating, my dad paid the check and hugged me in the parking lot. He said he was proud of how I was handling everything, and that helped both of us feel less guilty about missing the signs. I ran into one of Norman's cousins at the grocery store 3 days later. I was reaching for cereal when I heard someone say my name. I turned and there she was, looking uncomfortable but walking toward me anyway. She said she'd been thinking about me and wanted to check how I was doing. I said I was fine and tried to move my cart past her, but she kept talking. She said Norman was really struggling with everything, like that was supposed to make me feel something other than angry. I stopped and looked at her directly. I told her he should be struggling since he created this entire mess by lying for 2 years and cheating 3 months before our wedding. Her face went red and she started to say something about how everyone makes mistakes. I didn't let her finish. I said mistakes are forgetting to call someone back or being late to dinner, not hiding a child and stalking an ex. Then I walked away before she could say anything else. My hands were shaking when I got to the checkout line, but I was glad I'd said it. Valeria called me that evening with final numbers on the wedding costs. I'd been avoiding thinking about the money part because I knew it would make me angry all over again. She went through each vendor and what they'd agreed to. The venue kept half the deposit. The caterer kept $1,000. The photographer took 60% like we'd negotiated. The florist kept everything because flowers had already been ordered. When she finished adding it up, she said I was losing about $12,000 total. It was less than I'd feared when I first started canceling things, but it was still a huge financial hit that made me want to scream. $12,000 gone because Norman couldn't tell the truth. Valeria said she was sorry and that she'd done everything she could to minimize the losses. I thanked her for all her help and hung up. Then I sat on Claire's couch and stared at the wall, doing math in my head about how long it would take me to recover from this. I decided to ask Norman to pay half of the lost deposits. It seemed fair since his lies caused the cancellation in the first place. I opened my laptop and started an email, keeping it formal and direct. I wrote out an itemized list of every lost deposit with the vendor name and amount. The total came to $12,347. I asked him to pay half, which was $6,173.50. I said it was only fair that he take some financial responsibility for the consequences of his actions. I read the email 3 times before sending it, making sure my tone stayed calm and factual. His response came back 2 hours later. It was long, way longer than it needed to be. He wrote about how he was already financially stressed from lawyer fees for the custody situation with Vanessa. He said he was barely making rent right now and couldn't afford to pay me anything. He went on about how he knew he'd messed up, but punishing him financially wouldn't help either of us move forward. The whole message made me want to scream. He was acting like paying for the damage he caused was some kind of unfair punishment instead of basic responsibility. I called Nadia and told her about Norman's response. She asked if I wanted her to send him a legal letter demanding repayment, and I said yes immediately. His refusal to take any financial responsibility was somehow more infuriating than the original betrayal. At least when he lied about his son and the affair, I could tell myself he was weak or scared or whatever excuse made sense. But refusing to pay for the mess he created was just selfish. Nadia said she'd draft something official and have it sent within a few days. The letter would request $6,000 within 30 days and outline potential legal action if he didn't comply. I knew he probably still wouldn't pay, but having it in writing from a lawyer felt important. It felt like I was doing something instead of just accepting that he could destroy my life and walk away without consequences. Norman's father called my dad a week after Nadia sent the letter. My dad called me right after and put me on speaker so I could hear what had happened. Norman's father had offered to pay $3,000 to help settle things and let everyone move forward. He said he knew his son had made terrible choices and he wanted to do something to make it right. My dad asked me what I wanted to do. I thought about it for a minute. $3,000 wasn't the full $6,000 I'd asked for, but it was better than nothing. I told my dad to accept it. I wanted this finished. I wanted to stop thinking about Norman and his family and the money I'd lost. My dad said he'd call back and arrange the payment. Norman's father sent a check 2 days later with a note saying he was sorry for everything. I deposited it without reading the note again. I started looking for a new